There's a moment in combat that most people never hear about. It's not when the shooting starts. It's not when the mission goes wrong. And it's not when someone is hit. It's the moment a man realizes something far worse. No help is coming. No air support, no backup, no second chance. And in that moment, there are only two options. Step back or step forward, knowing exactly what that will cost. Tonight, I want to tell you the true story of a Green Beret who made that choice. Not for recognition, not for survival, but because other men's lives depended on it. This is the story of Staff Sergeant Robert James Miller, a Green Beret who gets the Medal of Honor. On September the 8th, 2009, Robert James Miller was serving as a staff sergeant in the United States Army Special Forces, a Green Beret assigned to an Operational Detachment Alpha, ODA, advising the Afghan forces near the village of Ganskal in eastern Afghanistan's Kunar province. The mission that morning was not an assault. It was a shura, a meeting with village elders, part of a broader counterinsurgency effort to reduce Taliban influence without escalating violence. The Americans moved into terrain that was severely disadvantaged. The village sat below dominating high ground. Movement corridors were narrow. Compounds were fortified. Cover was limited. Taliban fighters had prepared the battlefield. As the patrol entered Ganskal, coordinated enemy fire erupted almost immediately. This was not sporadic shooting. Multiple Taliban positions opened fire simultaneously from elevated bridge lines, from rooftops, and compounds overlooking the patrol's route. Within seconds, several Americans were wounded. Others were pinned in exposed or marginal cover. Movement became extremely dangerous. Calls for close air support and indirect fires were transmitted. Those requests were delayed or denied due to command and control failures higher in the chain. On the ground, that meant something stark. There would be no immediate help. Staff Sergeant Miller quickly recognized the most urgent threat. Several American personnel were pinned down in exposed positions, unable to move without drawing concentrated fire. If they stayed where they were, they would be killed. Miller made a deliberate decision. He would draw the enemy's fire onto himself. Miller left covered terrain and moved into open ground, fully exposed to enemy fire. This was not instinctive panic. This was calculated risk. He maneuvered forward, firing his weapon and engaging Taliban positions from angles that forced the enemy to shift their focus. Eyewitness accounts consistently emphasized this point. Miller intentionally made himself the most visible American on the battlefield. As enemy fire shifted toward him, pressure eased on the trapped Americans. They were able to move. Lives were saved in those seconds. During this movement, Miller was hit by enemy fire. Despite being wounded, he did not withdraw. He repositioned again, still exposed, continuing to engage the enemy. The pattern repeated. Move forward, draw fire, return fire, reposition. Each movement bought time. Each exposure increased the risk. Miller was hit again. Still, he continued to fight. Witnesses later stated that Miller appeared fully aware of the danger and fully committed to the decision he had made. As the engagement intensified, Miller moved yet again into an exposed position. This time, he was struck by multiple rounds in rapid succession. The wounds were catastrophic. He fell. Enemy fire continued to impact around him. Several teammates, including fellow Green Berets and Marines, immediately moved toward Miller's position. This was an extraordinary risk. The same fire that had just wounded Miller was still active. They dragged him to what little cover was available. They applied direct pressure to his wounds. They spoke to him, trying to keep him conscious. There was no secured casualty collection point, no protected medical evacuation route, no immediate air support, just men kneeling in dirt and rubble, hands covered in blood, refusing to leave one of their own. Accounts from those present describe Miller as calm and aware. He understood his injuries were severe. There was no panic, there was no pleading, only composure. Those tended him continued life-saving efforts until it became clear that his wounds were unsurvivable. Robert James Miller died there in Ganskal, surrounded by teammates who had risked their lives to reach him and who stayed with him until the end. Miller's actions drew enemy fire away from exposed Americans. They allowed trapped personnel to reposition. They directly saved multiple lives. This is not theoretical. Men who survived Ganjgal did so because Miller chose to step forward. In 2010, Staff Sergeant Robert James Miller was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor. Citation recognizes repeated exposure to enemy fire, voluntary movement into open terrain, continued engagement after being wounded, and ultimate sacrifice in defense of others. But citations are sterile. What they cannot fully capture is this: Robert Miller knew the cost of what he was doing, and he paid it anyway. Miller's death was not a failure of courage. It was the final expression of responsibility. He did not die chasing the enemy. He died standing between his teammates and death. And he did not die alone. That matters. When systems fail, when plans collapse, when help doesn't arrive, leadership doesn't disappear. It changes shape. On the same battlefield where Robert Miller fell, another Green Beret made a different kind of choice: to stay, to organize, to save whoever could still be saved. This is part 2 of the battle that day. Captain William Swenson was part of the same engagement at Ganjgal. He was wounded early by shrapnel, suffered severe blood loss. By doctrine, he could have stayed under cover. He did not. Despite his injuries, Swenson coordinated the move under fire, coordinating, directing, stabilizing the chaos around him. He understood something critical. If leadership stopped moving, people would die. Swenson repeatedly exposed himself to enemy fire. He directed movements. He assisted the wounded. He repositioned elements under pressure at multiple points to place himself between enemy fire and injured Americans. Not impulsively, but deliberately. This was leadership under collapse, not commanding from safety, but sharing the risk. Eventually, a helicopter approached under fire. There was no secured landing zone. Swenson and others physically carried fallen Americans toward the aircraft. Men moved bodies under fire because there was no other option. Swenson helped load the wounded and the dead while exposed to enemy fire. This was not bravery for recognition. This was refusal to leave them behind. Swenson survived Ganskal, but survival carries its own burden. He would later speak openly about the cost, not just physical wounds, but the knowledge of what should have happened and what didn't. His Medal of Honor came years later, delayed by those above him whom he blamed for the deaths. Contested, but earned beyond question. Robert Miller stepped forward so others could live. William Swenson stayed standing so the wounded could be carried out. One died holding the line. One lived, refusing to let the line disappear. This is what heroism looks like when victory is not an option. Not flawless execution, not perfect plans, but men who choose responsibility over self, even when the system around them fails. On Blue Steel Heroes, we tell these stories so the names endure, so the cost of courage is never abstract. I'm Dave Ross, and this is Blue Steel Heroes. If you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and hit the like button.